Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Mark Squilla, with whom we'll be continuing our series of council preview interviews, and by Ron Blunt of the Philadelphia Unemployment Project to discuss a very interesting reverse commute program that people who work in the suburbs but live in the city should know about. Joining us is Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. We have a lot to get to tonight.
Mhm.
Uh, our interview with the councilman and our interview with Mr. Ron Blunt. And we'll also be talking about the recently released student debt plan that President Biden put out today. Uh,
Yes.
so a lot to get to. So what we're going to lead off with is our interview with Councilmember Mark Squilla. All right, Councilmember Mark Squilla, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, listen, it's a pleasure being here today and really enjoy the opportunity to be able to speak and share some information on our upcoming session here in council.
Great. Well, Councilman, the first thing I'd like to ask you, you are the majority deputy whip. What exactly does that mean?
Normally, what the whip position is, and we go during council when there are legislative policies and being set forth and bills being introduced. You go around and try to work with our colleagues to get enough support to pass that legislation. Work strongly with the council president and majority leader, Council Member Jones, and myself will try to help get legislation passed that benefits the city as a whole, and try to get most of the members on the same page.
Okay. So City Council's fall session begins in just a few weeks. Specifically, what are your top priorities for this fall session?
Well, I think anything, if you go to any meetings lately, public safety has to be our number one priority. It's something that we hear day in and day out, whether it's through emails that come into our office or at a community meeting where, some of our businesses are struggling to feel safe, our residents, and even our visitors. So I think the number one priority is how we look at public safety, how we are going to enforce certain measures, and how are we going to work to prevent some of the issues that, the perception of lawlessness that's happening now in the city of Philadelphia.
And generally, do you think that's what most members are coming in thinking about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of items on the agenda, right? Affordable housing is also something that's very serious. How we're dealing with our homeless population, working more to look at housing opportunities. How do we look at, as part of public safety, how do we look at diversionary programs? We just started off AMP Court in August, early this month. It's 2 days a week right now, and it's an alternative misdemeanor program which will hopefully go to 5 days a week starting in November. And then, alternative, and then prevention. When we put a lot of money in the budget last year for prevention programs and outreach, trying to get to the people more likely to be part of victims of crime or a part of crime, and trying to do that. So I think you're going to see a lot of different approaches from council, but I think it's all going to revolve around public safety, and then also the affordable housing and how we deal with our opioid epidemic and our homelessness that's prevalent right now in the city.
And one of the key drivers of the violence we've been seeing is poverty. What steps do you think council should be taking, will be taking, in order to sort of help break that 26% poverty rate?
Well, when you look at the investment into the communities, a lot of that has to do with the $184 million that we put in, has to go out into those communities, work with the community leaders that are already there in place, and how we could partner with them to go to the people and see what is needed. A lot of the violence that we're seeing, normally that's what's different this time and then previous times, is it's a lot younger folks. So a lot of our, issues and concentration was on like job placement and getting job opportunities to some of the people who were a little older. When we're seeing some of our violent crime happening by 12, 13, 14-year-olds that, should be in school, how are we going to change that and direct that messaging into how do we find out what it is that they need? How do we get them interested in the school activity or even a trade and start that through an educational process more or less than a job, because some of those folks are even too young to work. And, so this is something different. We have GVI, it's a gun violence initiative that is out there and reaching out to some of these folks, most likely to commit a violent crime, or be a victim of a violent crime. And they do the call-ins for people who are on probation and parole, but also doing outreach, which means going to those areas, talking to those individuals, and trying to get them to realize that there's other opportunities than the street life.
I imagine in your position, you have so many different ideas brought to you. You have so many different ideas, different policy ideas, technology. How do you sit down and determine what might be a good thing to pursue?
Well, it's funny you say that, because there are always many different things, and you could do more than one thing at a time. Because some people will say, well, like, we're having this issue. What are you doing that for? And, small businesses are such to me, an important part of the growth of the city of Philadelphia, having especially some of our immigrant communities where, their livelihood is in their little business. And so you could do promotion of small businesses and looking at commercial corridors and doing street cleaning, also, making sure our lights are fixed and transitioning from our lighting system to LEDs. You could do all these things while also tackling the crime issue, right? It's not just one. You can't just do one particular thing and say, this is the only thing I'm interested in, right? We have school issues, right? Funding for our schools. We have buildings that are falling apart. So there's a lot of multiple things that you need to address. But a lot of these issues do come from our constituents. There are people who reach out and say, why don't we do this? Or let's meet and brainstorm. And how can we, help reduce some of the crime in certain areas? How can we address some of the outdoor open air drug markets? How do we deal with prostitution or addiction and the people on the streets? And people do have, alternative ideas. The hard part is in the city, you have to be able to change. People are used to doing something a certain way, and whether it worked or don't work, this is the way we do it. And I think we as a city need to take a step back, and it's okay to try something and fail, right? And that's what we need to do more of. Like, let's try this and see if it works. Does it get us into a better place, right? We don't have to rewrite the whole system, but we should be able to alter it or tweak it in ways that say, all right, this does not work in the way we intended it, so let's change a little bit. And we see that a lot with our homeless population and in our engagement. When we engage them and we ask them, you want help, we have shelter for you. We have, rehab or MAT, medical assistance treatment. Do you want to go? You want to get help? And if they say no, you say, okay. And you just let them go and move on. So to me, we're not helping them by allowing them to do that. And we're not helping the surrounding community who's being negatively impacted by that. So that's what AMP Court does. Is AMP Court gives us an opportunity. It's an alternative misdemeanor program where if the officer makes that arrest and brings them in and say, hey guys, listen, we have these programs. We have all these social services people here that could help you. We could do MAT treatment. We could do rehab. We could do low barrier housing. We have these things. If you agree to join this program, once you're done, these charges are dropped. And now we're helping them. We're helping them make a decision to try to get them off the street and on a better path. And I think now it's only 2 days a week right now, but I think this program, once it ramps up to 5 days a week, you'll start seeing more and more people taking the help instead of just turning it down because there's an alternative. I mean, and there's a consequence. If you don't take the help, then there are going to be charges because of the illegal activities that you're doing. And then we want to bring back community court. Community court used to be something that was very successful for minor issues. It was like retail theft, urinating in public, blocking the highway, things like that, where you could bring them in and then you would issue community service. And that community service was often done in the communities where they committed that violation. And, it was great because, the charges would eventually just get dropped and the people had a consequence of community service. And then they felt good about themselves. A lot of those folks, before I got into council, we used to run a program where we used to get a lot of the kids from community service and people who did minor violations as offenses, and they would like clean a park or clean a lot or a playground. And then some of those people would even come back and volunteer later on and say, I enjoyed this. I felt good that I was doing something good for the community, and it made them feel good about it. And then, they're more likely, hopefully, not to commit that same offense. So these are things that we really need to get back up and running. There are resources that are attached to that, but I think they're well worth it because I think the outcomes will benefit us, and also people will know that yes, there are consequences to some of these bad behaviors, and it's not just going to get pushed away and nobody care about.
I think more than any other council member, I think I've heard you say we have to try things and not necessarily be afraid if it doesn't work. And that to me makes a lot of sense. But do you think, not just local government wise, but state government, federal government, that there's an aversion to risk because it's such a results oriented business? And how do you work through that?
I hear it all the time. Like, we can't do this because if it fails, it's going to be looked at as our program that failed. And I'm saying, well, we can do it because what we're doing right now is not working. So we can't just say if we do nothing, it's going to go away. And it is hard being an elected official because you have to run every so often and you try to promote yourself at that next election. And you don't want to say, I did try these things, they didn't work. I'll say, well, we'll get somebody else. Right. But I'd rather have somebody who's trying things that didn't work than not try anything or tell us we can't do it or there's nothing we could do. To me, that's the worst scenario. And we hear it all the time. And we also hear the blame game. It's not our fault. It's somebody else's fault. It's the Fed's fault for doing this. And the Feds need to, introduce stronger gun laws and the state needs to do this. No, we are elected officials here. It's all our problems and it's all our faults. So we need to put together what we can do as a city, not blame everybody else. And if they want to come along and do things to help us later on, great. But what can we do right now to make it better for the citizens in our city and not worry about what everybody else is doing? So we hear that, it's easy to blame others because it gets the attention off of you. But I think we need to stand together and stand up for the challenges that we're facing. And I think we need to know as elected officials that we are responsible. It's not somebody else's fault. We're elected here in the city. And it's up to us to make the decisions, make the changes necessary to make it better for all the residents in the city.
I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, Councilman. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. While we talked a little bit about what's coming up in council, there's a couple of other things that are happening in your district that I wanted to ask about. The biggest one being the fact that the Sixers want to put a new stadium downtown. Here is how the traffic on my inbox went when that announcement was made. First, I got the press release saying that the Sixers want to build a new stadium. The next thing I got was a press release from Asian Americans United saying that they were against this stadium. What are you hearing from your constituents about it? Or is it too early to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's people who are dead set against it, and there's people that are really supportive of it, but it's too early right now. We don't even know the whole plan. We do know that anytime you have a development like this size, there's going to be an impact on the surrounding community. So we do know that whatever the plan ends up being, as we meet with the developers and as we meet with the community, the Chinatown community and the surrounding Washington Square West and other stakeholders need to be involved in those conversations. If you are against this project, we need to know what are those issues that you are concerned with. Are you worried about traffic flow in there? Are you worried about small businesses being taken over? Are you worried about gentrification, affordable housing? How, if they are your concerns, do you bring them into a developers meeting and say, hey, these are our concerns and what can you do to eliminate our concerns? How can you mitigate these challenges that we see that are going to happen in our neighborhood from you doing this development? And then we need to have those conversations. One of the reporters said to me, like, why would you even consider this now that you're running? I said, as an elected official, we got to look at all these things that come in front of us. We got to weigh them out with the community concerns and what the city as growing city and metropolitan area is. the fascinating part about that project is it is going to be situated on top of a transportation hub. So it may be something different than we had in other areas when they tried to promote something like this. But I think it should be discussed. It should be thought out. And, being from South Philadelphia, and I remember the neighbors being against the, adding the new stadiums down there. And then I also know that, some of the community benefits that they receive from that afterwards. And the same thing when they put the casino down in South Philadelphia, there was a big uh, opposition to that being there. And then at the end of the day, they end up coming to an agreement with the community to mitigate all the challenges they thought were going to happen to their neighborhood, and then worked on a community benefits agreement that they thought would offset the negative impacts. The stadium district down there, they have like police that make sure their streets, people don't park on their streets, right? They make sure that the neighborhoods aren't affected by the traffic, and they keep the traffic on certain roads. These are challenges that I'm sure will be even more serious in Center City area. And how is the organization that's doing this development going to mitigate those changes, and what promises can they put in writing and have an agreement with the community to try to offset the negative impacts on that surrounding community? So I think it's too early right now. We don't know enough about the project. I know one of the concerns I had initially when I met with them was that I was worried about there's only 80 events a year or something like that out of 365 days. How is it going to be activated when it's not in use? And how can it be a benefit to the community? Are they going to make sure that they have active uses or retail around the Market Street, Filbert Street side of these buildings? How would it be used? Because if it's not used most of the year, which a lot of these stadiums are and arenas, then what are the other things that could benefit the community when it's not in use? So it's not only the problem of when it's in use, but what is the problem when it's not in use, and how can that also sometimes be a negative impact on the community? So there's a lot of discussions and conversations to still be had. And yes, there's going to be a lot of people opposed to it, there's going to be a lot of people supportive of it. And, we got to work our way through and see if it's possible, to either get it to go forward or say, you know what, this is just not going to work. The community's too much against it, and it's not something that would fit in downtown Center City.
Okay, because the thing that I noticed when I looked at the plan as it was proposed was Center City does not have a movie theater, or did not have a movie theater before the AMC was put there in the Fashion District. And I'm like, okay, so you go from not having a movie theater downtown, having a movie theater for a couple of years, and this project would take the movie theater away. So is that going to be?
Yeah, but is that true? Because I heard that they're going to be putting a movie theater in the other part of the gallery, and also some of the other uses that were in the one section into the other section. So Maastricht is supposedly, now I didn't meet with them yet, these are just conversations that we hear. They're saying that they would like to relocate all those folks that are in the one section into the other section of the gallery or the Fashion District to do that. Now that all stuff has to be hashed out and worked out and discussed, but we don't know that at this time. But it is a serious concern, and I think those are good questions and good reasons to have these continued conversations to see if these concerns could be mitigated.
Okay, another question I had concerns Washington Avenue. When the decision to only have half of when the reports came down about Washington Avenue, and the decision to only turn half of it into, I guess, a 3 or 4 lane highway for the purposes of adding bike lanes and different things came down. There was a lot, particularly on social media. You would have thought that the city had been burned to the ground, the way that some people were reacting to this. Talk a little bit about your thought process in terms of your part of Washington Avenue, and what led you to make the decisions you made regarding it.
Well, we'll start back in the very beginning of the process. We initially, Washington Avenue was looking to make it better for some of our businesses, safer for some of our pedestrians, our bike riders, and even the drivers on the highway. Washington Avenue is a thoroughfare that goes from river to river. It goes through the entire part of South Philadelphia. And there's a lot of businesses there. There's a lot of residential people there. So it's used by a lot of different people, a lot of different users. So what we wanted to do was when Otis came to us, Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability, they had a plan of how can we make Washington Avenue better equipped to handle all its diverse businesses and users, and also safer. So we initially started the conversations with some of the community, and they said, well, we don't want the elected officials in these conversations. We want the experts. We want Otis to run those meetings. So Councilman Johnson and myself relented. So we backed off. We said, all right, we'll have Otis run these outreach meetings. And they did outreach, and they were in charge of, connecting to some of the businesses, connecting to the community organizations. Sort of the problem was a lot of the engagement happened during the pandemic. So they were doing a lot of it virtually, and a lot of it seemed to miss some of the people who were actually in that community and felt like they didn't have a part of a say during those conversations. Now they went from a 5-lane highway, which it is today, and they went down to a 3-lane highway. And the part of the problem, they graded it from what it is now to the safest. So they already assumed that this is the safest option, the 3-lane highway. They did that outreach, they did the engagement, they came up with a study, and they said, all right, majority of the people want this 3-lane highway. Well, that's when we actually start getting pushback from some of the neighbors in and around the community saying, well, we weren't included in that outreach. We didn't know, they were telling us we wanted it safer. Of course we wanted it safer, right? And so Otis agreed to go back and say, you know what, we didn't do as much in-person engagement as we should have done. So now we're going out and doing this in-person engagement. And that's when you got a lot of pushback. So then my position all along was, whatever Otis and the communities came up with during their final conversation, I would support. I would support it. And I made that commitment early on, saying, as this process, will work through the process, and whatever happens at the end, we'll support it. And another issue was they came up with a final plan that had a 3-lane highway. Everybody got upset, and they had more meetings. And then they went and changed it, and they created a hybrid model where some things were 3-lane, some areas had 4-lane, and some had 5 lanes. And once that happened, everybody was mad. The people who wanted the 3-lane highway were mad. The people who wanted to keep it the same way were mad. Some of the businesses were mad, saying they weren't included. So what we did was we made Otis go back out to all the businesses and make sure they paid attention how they were going to load and unload, and then come up with a plan which would address the loading and unloading issues, which we see now on Washington Avenue, where they just use the travel lane to do that now. And this would hopefully help them to be able to have these businesses, stay alive and be a big part of the Washington Avenue 9th Street corridor there, and also be able to make it safer at the same time. Now, when I agreed to do the legislation, I did do that with a caveat that we wanted to see what the studies were before and have those studies included in the legislation. We also wanted a 1 and 2 year study after it was completed to see what negative impacts would be on the adjoining streets. So we have Federal Street, we have Ellsworth, we have Christian and Carpenter, and see how those streets would be handled. All the traffic that's going to divert off of Washington Avenue, are they going to be used on the residential streets? Does that make them less dangerous? So at the end, all that's being done is striping, repaving, and striping. So there's no really physical infrastructure that's going to happen. And so I agreed on my half of Washington Avenue to allow it to move forward with the restriping of the 3 and 4-lane, the hybrid model of this, to see how it was impacted, and then determine from the studies to see if it needs to be tweaked or changed in a year or two, once the street gets used in its new repaving model. And so, again, early on, I agreed to do what, Otis and the communities came up with. And even though no matter what we do, we never have 100% support for anything, whether it's a development, whether it's a street change, You go to those meetings, it's 50-50. It's like split right down the middle. Half the people love it, the other half hate it, and then there's people who don't care. So, eventually, as an elected official, you have to make a decision and you have to go with it. I think this allows us to, though, then re-look at this to see if it could be better. If it, did it make it safer? Did it make Washington Avenue safer? But did it make the adjoining streets less safe? So I think these studies will be able to tell us that, and then we may be able to go back and make additional changes, in the future.
When you talk about stuff like this, particularly, road changes or building things or, or redevelopment, the subject of gentrification comes up. People feeling like they're being pushed out of their neighborhood. Is that something council is going to take on this session? Because it comes up a lot.
It is, like we mentioned earlier, affordable housing is also part of that. And when you look to redo, even some people say, well, I don't want this park redone, because if this park gets redone, even though you're living there now and it's, pretty downtrodden and not work, then other people are going to move in and take it over. I think we as a city, we have a great opportunity, is that we could improve things for people who are living there, but then also we have to make sure that enable to keep them there and make sure that they could enjoy the new entities that we create. And it's not an easy process, because sometimes when you do make things better, other people are interested in that community, but it's no reason to say, well, we should just leave this as an open air drug market. People are using needles in this park and we should just leave it that way because it's going to allow us to stay here, right? But we need to make sure affordability is included in that. And so that people who are living in those communities can then also stay in those communities, even though they're improving, doing street cleaning, for instance, or including new lighting, right? There are things that are important, because the cleaner it is, we believe it's safer. And if it's safer, we think that the people living in there will be more apt to either come out, be a part of the community, and have a stakehold in their community. So the hard part is, how do we do both? And it hasn't been mastered yet. And I think that we just need to be very conscious of when we're doing it, to make sure that we're also looking at the people who from those communities should be able to stay in communities. And listen, a lot of my district has been gentrified. I mean, even as far as say the Queen Village area, the Pennsport area, you're looking at them now. It didn't really gentrify a lot of it racially, but socioeconomically, it's a big difference. There used to be longshoremen and police officers and carpenters, but now they're all professionals, and all those other people were moved out, and they moved either south or they moved out of the city in general. So we have to really put an emphasis on affordability to make sure that we're keeping affordability as part of our plan, even when we're improving the surrounding communities. And, when we do build a new building, can we make sure that affordability is part of that? We've added bonuses into our zoning code. So when they do build higher density, they have to have so much affordability as doing that. That'll help keep people from that community in there. We have a 5149 plan for city-owned properties, where a private developer could come in and buy city property, but they have to do 51% affordable, 49% market rate, so they could subsidize the affordability by selling market rate houses and then keep 51% of them affordable so people could buy them or rent them. So we need to continue that model, and we need to work other ways to make sure that affordability and people who live in those communities could still stay there, even though we're improving them.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. I'm going to turn it back over to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
Thank you, Denise. Councilman, I just have two quick things here at the end. What should the city do with its budget surplus?
Well, we have a lot of things that we would love to do with that. Obviously, we're looking at our schools and the need for improving our physical plan of all our schools. That's important. The other thing is, we had a great program for rent assistance, people who were struggling for rent. That actually helped both the renter and the landlord. A lot of our small-time landlords are people who do rent affordably. And, when people aren't able to pay, those folks aren't able to pay their taxes and their bills. So I think rent assistance is something that we should look at and make sure that we're able to fund that, so that people could still stay in their places there where they live. Also, I think that we made big commitments to prevention programs. I think we need to continue those commitments to help people who are challenged in a way that they're either most likely to be a victim of a crime or a perpetrator of a crime. And I think we need to do a better job of getting out into those communities and not waiting for people to come join these programs, but going out into those communities and seeing really what the concerns are. And then, creating job opportunities, but family sustaining wage opportunities, whether it's growing our court, making sure that our union workers are having a fair contract so that people who live in our communities, who work in our communities can live in our communities. And then that's an important part of it. If it becomes too expensive, I mean, even city workers, the challenge of them being able to buy a home will be greater. And Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods, right? The people love to be able to own a home. Even when we do affordable rental units, they're happy to have a place to rent, but they would always love to be able to own their own home. And we need to really help with home ownership. We did a great program this year where we have first-time home buyers, we have down payment assistance, we have closing cost assistance, and we help people who are living and working in the city to be able to buy a house in the city. These are the things I think we should be using those resources for. And we need to look at how we could make sure that we have housing for people who are unhoused. How do we look at making sure we have, whether it's shelter services or whether we have a place to transition from. So you have a temporary housing into more permanent housing. A lot of these folks need treatment and they need to be a way where they could be helped before you just can't put somebody who has mental health challenges or addiction challenges right into a home because it's going to help them to fail. So we need to make sure that we first engage them with social services necessary and then look at how we have a continuum of care where we help them through, we go into a halfway house, get them ready for work, and then progress into transitional housing and the more permanent housing. And I think that is where we need to really invest our money because it's going to take a little more time to get these folks. We can't expect after 30 days of some sort of treatment that we throw them right back in the street and they're going to be fine. We need to be able to spend that extra money to keep them housed or keep them in a halfway house and work on them to they could become self-sustaining.
And the last thing I'd like to ask you, whether we like it or not, we are in the 2023 mayoral campaign, I think even unofficially. What are the qualities you are looking for in a new mayor?
I think leadership. I think leadership is so important in that position. We need somebody to, take the reins and be responsible. We need somebody not to like point fingers and put, blame on everybody else. We need somebody to, when something does happen, to be able to stand up and be accountable. And I think, be able to handle challenges. As a mayor, it's a very tough job. Our city is very diverse. You have, from big immigrant communities, poverty is the number one issue, right? But then we also have very affluent people who live in certain areas. And you got to be able to address those concerns from all your constituents. And I think people want to know that you're going to try to do things and not just, wave a white flag and say that there's nothing we could do. I think so. The leadership quality is going to probably be the number one thing that people are looking for. And I think people are interested in what those policies are and what you're looking to do for public safety. How are you looking to make sure that people who can leave their homes and not afraid to go outside their homes, or the small business who's afraid that somebody's going to come in and take their livelihood away from them? What are you going to do to address those issues, right? And then how we deal with the everyday quality of life. I think that is something I hear more and more, that the quality of life issues are driving people crazy and they're driving them either to think about leaving the city of Philadelphia or not even coming here to eat or anything like that. And I think people want to see that. And I think community policing is something that's been discussed where the police and the community start to build trust with each other. Not a heavy-handed approach, but an approach where you could say, we have people on the beat. We're doing something in Old City right now where we have a person during the day that goes into every business, says hello to the people, knows the neighborhoods. If they see something, they understand that this is not normal. And having that relationship and building that trust, I think will really help. Now, obviously, we would have to hire some officers. We're not even at our complement. I'm not sure we'll get at our complement anytime soon. but it's a tough job. But I think if we place people in specific places so that people start to get the confidence that yes, we are addressing these issues and it will get better, I think that person will rise to the top, and I think leadership is the key to that.
All right, Councilmember Mark Spillett, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, and thank you for your great questions, and I appreciate you giving me the time to share a little bit of my opinion. So thank you very much.
All right, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. We'd like to thank Councilmember Squilla for being with us. We always enjoy speaking to the council member, and I thought he had some interesting things to say there.
Yeah, and particularly when he talked about how Philadelphia is a place that seems loath to try new ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, if there were anything that, because often you're sitting in front of the city's flag when we're doing the show, and it has like the coat of arms and stuff. And one of the things I always felt should be added to Philadelphia's coat of arms was the phrase, "That's the way we've always done it."
Right.
Because if I had a nickel for every time that I have heard "that's the way we've always done it" from a city worker, from someone in council, from the mayor's office, from any of the various city entities that are in charge of doing things here in the city, if I had a nickel for every time I have heard that from somebody, I could have retired 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because that's how often I've heard it. And while I appreciate Councilman Squilla's, I guess, desire to see the city try new things and willingness to admit that they're not always all going to work and that we still need to try them anyway, the only way that you're going to be successful at that is if all of the people who make it so that's the way we've always done it should be on the city's coat of arms are no longer in a position to keep doing it the way we've always done it. Because in many cases, I'm thinking anti-violence programs, I'm thinking street, like clearing up the potholes in the streets. There are so many instances where "that's the way we've always done it" has failed catastrophically.
Yeah.
That you sometimes say, okay, the definition of insanity is doing something the exact same way time after time and yet expecting a different result. What makes you think this is different?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to be, I'm very, very interested to see what's going to be happening in this fall session. We're 3 weeks away from it. So not too long to go, but it feels like it's taken forever because I'm really excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have another interview we want to run for you. And this is equally as interesting to me. This is an interview with Ron Blunt from the Philadelphia Unemployment Project. And he told us about this reverse commute program, and I didn't know anything about it. And I think it's a great idea. And Ron's going to tell you about it and tell you how you can get involved if you think this would benefit you. So here's our interview with Ron Blunt. Mr. Blunt, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Lawrence. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us what the Philadelphia Unemployment Project is?
Right. So it's a interesting project. It started in 1975, and then we in this country we had a major recession, and a lot of folks were becoming unemployed. So this project was created, and since then it is they started getting into a lot of other things like helping low income and poor people fight evictions and foreclosures. They got involved with a public jobs program, the TANF program, They got involved with health reform. They got involved with pushing to increase the minimum wage. We didn't win all these campaigns, but we were involved with them for working folks. And of course, we created several jobs clubs, and now we also are involved with this reverse commute to get folks to jobs in the suburbs.
All right. So how many people right now are working to get unemployment compensation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia?
Right. So I don't have an exact number, but I noticed that the numbers have dropped since the pandemic. It's down to somewhere like 3.6%. But of course, it's higher in Philadelphia and definitely in the people of color's community, the unemployment rate is higher.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much of a challenge is commuting for your clients?
Wow, that is a very good question. I would say like getting out to the suburbs, only 24% of the jobs are accessible by SEPTA within a 90-minute commute. 50% of folks in Philadelphia lower income neighborhoods do not have a private vehicle, so they really don't have a way of getting out there. And these are some really not really like you're going to get rich jobs, but they're living wage jobs, $19.50 an hour. I think the average is like $18 an hour. And a lot of these jobs have overtime. So it's a great opportunity for folks, that needs to get to work.
So tell us about that reverse program that you had mentioned.
Right. So SEPTA does a great job of getting suburbanites into the city for the city jobs. But in the reverse commute, because they're so low in number, they don't really have routes, and it's not really economically feasible for them to increase these routes. So this reverse option program, it sort of pays for itself. The riders pay $30 per week. We provide the van, the insurance, the gas card. We pay the tolls. And the city and the state contributes part of it to make this program work. The city gives us like a 15% match, but they get more than that back in wage taxes. So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
I'd like to bring in Denise Murray here on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
No,
Thanks,
pleasure.
Larry. And thank you, Mr. Blunt, for taking the time with us. Do the riders themselves drive the van, or is there like someone who drives them to work as part of this reverse commute?
Right. So that's the great part about this. So say there's one driver with a license that say he works out in Hatfield, Pennsylvania. If he can get 2 or 3 other workers at that plant or warehouse that live pretty much close to each other, they can create a pool. So the driver himself or herself, they're like the manager of the van. So we provide the van, we provide the gas, the tolls, and all those things. And also we give them like so many miles per week where they can take it for their personal use, take their family shopping and stuff like that. So it's just a win that everyone that's going to that plant or that warehouse to work, they can ride in the same vehicle. Normally they're neighbors. A lot of times they speak the same language, and it's just a win for them. And it doesn't take them like that 3 and 4 buses to get to work, so that's the convenient part about it.
Now, do you all have any sponsors? Like, are there car companies or car dealerships that have sponsored vans for you all as part of this?
Right. So we're basically funded by Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and the city matches 15% of what the PennDOT gives us, and SEPTA sort of manages it. We do work with Enterprise. I guess they're the largest car rental company in this area, and so they do help us with to make sure that there's roadside assistance, that there's insurance on the vehicles, that the maintenance is done regularly, and those kinds of things. So it's a partnership between the 4 groups.
Now, how do people connect with you to be a part of this? Are these people that you have helped get jobs in the suburbs and thus that there's a need? Or do people just reach out to you and say, hey, I have this great job, but it's out in Hatfield, and it takes me 4 buses to get there, and I'm still miles away from the job, and it's kind of impacting whether or not I can keep the job. Can you help me?
Right. So it's a combination right now of both employees that are looking for transportation to get to work. They contact us. We see where their employer is, and we talk to. We say, see if you can get 2, 3, 4 people that are that need the job too, that do work out there, and y'all can create a pool. And number two, another way we do it is through the employer. If the employer has 4 or 5 people that live in the same neighborhood and they have no way of getting to work, they reach out to us. So it's, it's a little bit like both ways of getting it done.
Wow. Now, in terms of jobs for people inside the city, what is the unemployment project doing in terms of helping create more employment in the city?
That is a very good question. So inside of Philadelphia, we do have our jobs club where unemployed folks meet to sharpen their skills to get back into the workforce. When an employer in the city do reach out to us and say that they're going to have a job fair or they're hiring, we send out a mass email or text to let unemployed workers know that these opportunities exist. And I guess more importantly of what we do is when people become unemployed in the city and there's no one to talk to, there's no one to help them to get their unemployment, they're about to get evicted from their house or their rental unit, they come to us and we're able to help in these other ways for people.
Okay. Now, everybody talks about the fact that Philadelphia is the poorest city of its size in the United States. And part of that poverty stems from people not having work. If you could create, if you were to go to the mayor right now and know that when you got left the office, you would get exactly what you needed to change that dynamic in the city of Philadelphia, what would you ask for and why?
Right. So we would probably ask for a jobs expansion plan for right now. Like say, for example, there's a shortage of bus drivers in the city. There's a shortage of other school workers, janitors and engineers to work inside of the buildings. There may be some jobs that doesn't require a lot of skill that they can start working for in the city. More so than say, okay, well, sign up for this apprenticeship program and then in 3 or 4 years, you're gonna have a job. You know, we think folks need something immediately. I mean, they got immediate bills to pay. They got immediate short childcare stuff they have to take care of. So we would ask for something today. Put people back to work today first, jobs first.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Blunt. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it back over to Larry McGlynn on homeowner.
Thank you, Denise. Just a couple quick things before we let you go. What are some of the other projects that the Philadelphia Unemployment Project is working on right now?
Right. So as you know, a lot of people lost their work during this pandemic. They fell behind on their mortgages, they fell behind on their rent. And I think that that is very, very important to keep people in their houses. When the sheriff office wanted to restart the eviction process, we immediately organized homeowners to come together, put pressure on the sheriffs to back off for a second while we're in this pandemic. So those kinds of things are very, very important. And along with unemployment, since the pandemic started, for our little nonprofit, over 4,000 people have filled out our help form, and thousands more have made phone calls because they can't even get online because they don't have a device or they may not have the technology skills to fill out an unemployment application, where we can come in and help in that situation. And then again, with the reverse commute, so those projects we think really help low-income Philadelphians to get on their feet.
And where can people learn more about what you do and contact you if they need help?
Right, and we really want people to contact us if they need help. You can reach us at www.philaup.org, PHILAUP.org. And you can also reach us at 215-557-0822. And my extension is 127, but you can hit any of them and we all be more than willing to help you.
Mr. Blunt, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both, okay? Have a good day.
And we'd like to thank Mr. Ron Blunt from the Philadelphia Unemployment Project for joining us. If you're facing unemployment or have been, these are the people you should reach out to, because they do a lot of great work. They have programs they run themselves. They know how the system works
Mhm.
at the state level and the local level. So these are people you should give a call to.
And that's important because for a lot of people, the pandemic was the first time they've ever experienced unemployment, and they didn't know how the system worked, or if it worked, or how it could work for them. So it's good to have something like the Philadelphia Unemployment Project, particularly in a city like Philadelphia, where there are a whole lot of unemployed people.
Yeah.
And it helps to have someone that can help you, move past that.
Yeah, especially now, because
Mhm.
it has been such a difficult time for so many people. So Denise,
Mhm.
something not entirely unexpected happened today.
Right.
President Biden announced that the government was going to discharge $10,000 or $20,000 in student loan debt, depending on your situation.
Mhm.
And I wanted to get your take on that. What do you think about this?
Well, as you know, because I've said this on the show before, I don't I have no problem with people saying we need to cancel student loan debt. I actually think that canceling the interest on student loan debt would be more productive and would make more sense in both the long and short term. But canceling the debt itself, if that can happen, great. But, and I will continue to say this until we actually address it, you have over 100 million people that are being asked to tear their credit apart, that are looking at having their homes foreclosed on, and that are looking at all other sorts of financial issues due to the issue of medical debt. And I hope that at some point we actually take some steps to address that. Now, of course, this $10,000 to $20,000 is not enough for some people, and I get that. When you have, like, even my husband said, "Well, I have $100,000 in debt. That's not going to help me." I'm like, "It's going to help you to a point. You're now down to $90,000 because he makes less than 125,000." And then, of course, you have the people who are like, "Oh, well, $125,000 isn't a lot of money." I hate to break it to you kids, but
It
if
is.
you can't live on $125,000 a year, there's either a drug habit or a gambling habit in the mix, and you might need to seek some counseling. Because
That's enough money.
yes, because those of us who were not born with a silver spoon anywhere near us know how to live. If I were given $125,000 a year to live on, I would probably have anywhere from 50 to 70 of it left every year because
Yeah.
I don't need that much. And, you know, if I do decide to use a little extra to do something special for myself or my husband, that's one thing. But I can live on $125,000 a year. So I'm going to say this to anybody who's out there that wants to give me $125,000 a year. I can live off of that and be very, very happy. But I also think that this is, if nothing else, I'm hoping that this gives us enough time to have the real discussion that we really need to have, which is that A, we need to talk about student loan interest, and B, we need to talk about how everybody is approaching the wrong branch of government about this. Congress, unless something has changed in the last 24 hours and I didn't know it or hear about it, Congress holds the power of the purse. And since Congress holds the power of the purse, Joe Biden can say whatever he wants about I want to cancel all student debt. He can say that to, until the cows come home. But the bottom line is, unless there is a law passed by Congress allowing him to do it, he can't. And in fact, you better enjoy this 10 to 20 grand while you can, because this is basically an executive order. And executive orders are good until the administration that comes in next, that does not want them around, comes in. Or does everybody not remember that one of the first things that Donald Trump did was get rid of the executive order that allowed DACA recipients to be able to do what they needed to do to go to school, work, and do other things in this country, because they had been here since they were a year old or less and didn't know anywhere else.
Yeah.
So while everybody's ready to make Joe Biden, particularly the folks on the far left, while you're all ready to make Joe Biden pay for not fulfilling a promise that he actually didn't make on the campaign trail, how about looking at Congress? Because if you want student loan forgiveness, if you want medical debt forgiveness, if you want reparations, yes, I went there. If you want any of those things, you're going to need a new Congress. And it starts now.
Yeah. And what I would say about it is I'm all for canceling all sorts of debt, because a lot of it's predatory and designed to be predatory. But I feel like even this small measure, and I'll for some people, I think it is going to be very helpful, but it really is kind of a smaller measure than I think what people are expecting. But the other half of this is working to bring down the cost of college in general. When I was teaching, I taught at a small university, and I would always volunteer to teach it was part of my job to teach these freshman experience courses. And I would tell my students the cost of a college education in the last 40 or 50 years has gone up 3,000%. Your parents and grandparents could work a part-time job and pay for it and pay for college. You cannot do that.
Heck, I worked a full-time job and paid for it.
And it's the kind of thing where, I think it's almost like a racket. You're telling people you have to go to college, and you don't. I mean, and I taught at a college. I've gone to college. I think it's excellent, but it's not everybody has to do it to have a successful life.
Well,
and
you're right on the one hand, but you've got McDonald's locations that are requiring college degrees.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous. But the thing is, you're right. We need to have a discussion about how expensive college has become. And what we also need to have a discussion about is why it became that expensive. And it became that expensive because, let's face it, college has always been the great equalizer. And education has always been the great equalizer. And as long as you have people, and this has been going on since the Reagan administration, and as long as you have people who are running around here saying we want our country back because at one time the country had no middle class, it was just the rich and the people who cleaned the toilets of the rich, and that is what people want to go back to. If you make education so cost prohibitive that the children of the people who were until the 1980s the middle class can no longer afford it, then you go back to the situation where you had the rich and the people who clean the richest toilets.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Next week on the program, we're going to continue with our council preview with council members Kendra Brooks and Isaiah Thomas. So thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you next week.